I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
They'll buy from anyone who wants to sell to them. But we all know that before you can sell to customers, you've got to get to know them. You must understand something about them. What do the Negro customers buy? Why do they buy? How do you sell to them?
How you mean? I casket sharp, ain't
Boy,
it?
I like that hat on you now.
Yeah, for real?
Boy, you white fine, boy.
Oh, I didn't know I realized you now.
Wait, sir, I found a hat in the back designed by a black guy. Probably fit your income.
You must ain't know about our black buying power, ain't it?
Oh, no. All right, I'll sell you the high price shit. Work for us, give us money back.
See, I gotta have
No,
some money
you
left over
ain't.
for the sugar shack about 10 years. You know, get us a little bail or something, you know?
Here you go, sir.
Oh, appreciate them. Hey, you know what? I want them bucket to know we less threatening and stuff. So let me get another hat. Let them boy know we ready to spend some money and shit. For real. Baby, you know what? I could just buy a bail for you. I ain't want them again, you know what I'm saying? Because we need a designated driver and stuff like that, you know? And you probably ain't got no money on gas, so we need to get some of that too. Yeah.
Here's your other hat, sir.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's it, Dave. Black and gray on the outside and straight white on the inside. Oh, ready for them boy now? Yeah, that's it, Dave. I'm about to show these buckers my buying power real G. Hey, baby, I look good?
That thing bad now.
Yeah? All right, straight up. Hey, let me get 2 more of them things. I can tell a light man I ain't got them this month, man. Yeah, I'm trying to get one of them Bucker big pen right there.
Oh, no, I got something better for that. Maybe a pen that you can afford since you don't have as much power.
No, no, I ain't want them. Because if a black man make up, I know it ain't gonna work. The ball will dry up. You have to lick the tip. See what I tell you? No, I ain't want this thing in now.
You guys don't really have buying power. They just trying to quiet your revolutionary.
Oh, yeah? That what them boy doing? Oh, shoot, I could try him again then and see if he still ain't work, man. Man, bump this pen, man. It ain't work, man. Give me that expensive
All right,
shit.
well, look, your purchase of this white-owned pen will help us achieve national racial harmony.
I'll holler at y'all boy later, man.
I mix what
They'll
I
buy
like,
from
what I
anyone
like,
who wants
what
to
I
sell.
like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like Live, right here on Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Greetings, everyone. Shout out to Geechee Yaw, whose Instagram should now be added to the show notes for setting us up in what I think is going to become a routine intro to these segments where we talk about buying power and the mythology and the recurrence of it, which we're going to get into first before we get into the main topic of the day, which is, of course, the Epic Games Fortnite most recent attempt and effort to corrupt and co-opt Dr. King. So as my man Math Hoffa says, not to suggest that we know each other, but I watch his stuff all the time. I watch his YouTube all the time. Get in here. He just had a really good conversation with Talib Kweli, by the way, and some others. But anyway, so greetings, everybody. Please jump in. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend, as the ear doctor says. Definitely hit the like, join, subscribe, and the bell. And help support and expand and share and join in the fun as I try to hold it down for this edition of a Boom Bap Breakfast. Speaking of which, before we get any move any farther, for some reorganization and scheduling corrections and some sort of channel-wide quick breathtaking. The Remix Morning Show will be on a quick and brief hiatus this week, and we'll be back next week at full strength. But don't worry, we have some specials. We have some offerings, shall I say, to hold us down in the interim before the reconstituted crew reconvenes next week. So I think we're far enough to say that I think on Wednesday morning we're going to have a very special conversation in this block with the daughter of Richard Wright, Julia Wright, Mama Julia, about the publication of their new book, The Man Who Lives Underground, I think is what it's called, if I'm not mistaken. And for a more, wide-ranging conversation about Mumia, political prisoners, the United Nations, all of which she's highly involved in. So that's one of the things. We're going to also have some other specials, something coming up this morning, just to hold us down for our Boom Bat breakfasts. And then, of course, I'll be back on Friday to try to kick off the weekend. So appreciate you all bearing with us as we make these adjustments and keep it moving. All right. Okay, so that said, as we saw there, again, shout out to Geechee Yaw. We're going to see some more from him today and going forward. That's not the only contribution he's going to be making to today's program, whether or not he is aware of it. Certainly, good morning, everybody. Absolutely free Mumia. That's right. I got my Epic Games Dr. Ball jersey ready. This is, by the way, everybody, this is an early birthday gift from my cousin-in-law. It's a Panama jersey, 28 for the day of my birthday. Check it out though. Check it out. Can you see that? Bam! Got my name on the back. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to cousin Eduardo, who, by the way, rocked this jersey for real at one point in his career as a member of Panama's national team. So shout out to him and shout out for, the fly jersey. Absolutely. Big up to all of my Gullah Geechee people. No doubt. And not that I'm advocating this, and I get the conspiracy stuff, and, I'm not entirely comfortable that I did it, but I did do some years ago one of those DNA joints, and some of my roots run down that way. So apparently. So I'm proud of that. Not claiming it. I'm not going to start fronting like that, but I'm very proud of that. Shout out to them. Shout out to Geechee Yaw and the Gullah Geechee folks. All right. So this morning, a little bit of buying power, and then this Dr. King Epic Games thing. Thanks for showing up, not knowing what's coming. Saludos también, familia. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Okay. Let us proceed. All right. So initially, I definitely have to shout out Two Black of the Black Miss podcast for initially putting me onto this, and I've just had a chance to go through it. And as it relates to this ongoing promotion of economic myth and what in some ways my arguments around buying power have been trying to show. It was a story that came out the other day in the Washington Post. Right here. Corporate America's $50 billion promise. And it's a long piece, so we're not going to go through the whole thing, but just a couple of excerpts that I just want to quickly highlight here that definitely relate to a lot of my own work and what we're doing here. Oh man. Anyway, now I'll save that. I got a story, but I'm gonna save that one. So as the story says, quote, looking deeper, because there was was it says here, a post analysis of racial justice pledges after George Floyd's death reveals the limits of corporate power to affect change. Now, I don't think many of us in this particular audience needed the Washington Post to let us know that corporations are not what's going to affect change, but uh um and I was very happy to see in the piece, which is in the show notes, so people can see it on their own in its entirety, that Mayor Baradaran is quoted more akin to what I understood her work to be saying, which is that corporations and banks are not an answer here. And in fact, she says, as I think I have clipped here, but yeah, I do. So we'll get to that in just a second. But anyway, so I was very glad to see that, and I encourage people to read the entire thing. But for our purposes here, it says looking deeper, more than 90% of that amount, that is of the 50 billion, specifically $45.2 billion, is allocated as loans or investments they could stand to profit from. More than half in the form of mortgages. Two banks, JP Morgan Chase and Bank America, accounted for nearly all of those commitments. So what it's saying is that while there's this headline claim that major corporations are donating to what is meant to help Black people in the wake of George Floyd, what it shows is that most of it is coming from banks that it says here, to date, America's 50 biggest public companies and their foundations collectively committed at least $49.5 billion since Floyd's murder last May to addressing racial inequality, an amount that appears unequaled in sheer scale. But as I just read, looking deeper, more than 90% of that comes from JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America, and comes in ways that they could profit from. That is mortgages, investments, loans, and the like. Meanwhile, 4.2 billion of the total pledge is in the form of outright grants. Of that, companies reported just a tiny fraction, about 70 million, went to organizations focused specifically on criminal justice reform, the cause that sent millions into the streets protesting Floyd's murder by a Minneapolis police officer. And then it shows a little bit of the breakdown here that of the direct donations, which is just the 4.2 billion, because again, most of it is in investments, loans, mortgages. But of the donations, 2.1 went to economic equality. And as we'll see, what of course that means is financial literacy training, whatever, that kind of stuff. But which is again part of what I've been trying to show and continue to argue, that buying power is a small subset of trying to encourage, walk Black people and others, but Black people primarily, away from political organization, trying to assume political power. And again, by that, I do not mean voting for a corporate mainstream Democrat or something like that. I'm talking about, in an intentionally vague way, all by any means necessary, assuming political power. That is what determines how wealth is created and who gets it, or what even constitutes wealth, or how wealth is created. That's political power. And to keep us away from even thinking about that, we are encouraged in the smallest from them, but in the grand way, in many ways to us, to focus on our own ability to become financially literate, etc. 499 million to education, health, so on and so on. But again, That's only out of this 4.2 billion versus the 45.2 billion going to loans, investments, and other initiatives. The article continues, the 4.2 billion in grants to be dispersed over as long as a decade in some cases represents less than 1% of the $525.6 billion in net income earned by the 50 companies in the most recent year, according to the data from the S&P Global Intelligence. So you can see that here. 526 billion these folks made, and they've dispersed less than 1%. And in this next, let's see, among the investments aimed at narrowing the racial wealth gap. This was one of my favorite parts of the article that ties very nicely into what I've already linked in the show notes that we did a couple of days ago with Brother Kaba. Among the investments aimed at narrowing the racial wealth gap is the $28 billion in housing and business loans in Black and Latino communities that JP Morgan Chase has pledged with the goal of moving 40,000 families into home ownership over the next 5 years. PayPal is investing $500 million in Black and Latino financial institutions and venture capital funds. Google is donating $50 million in historically Black colleges and universities to increase Black representation in the tech sector. So this goes back to a number of things we've been talking about a lot on my humble little show here and elsewhere. One, again, encouraging that Black people channel their righteously angry militant political desires into home ownership and mortgages, or in terms of higher education, particularly in Black colleges and universities, encouraging STEM and tech. And as we talked about before, there is a history of this being connected to HBCUs being defunded after the Black Power uprisings and the civil rights movement, with an attempt to fund more quote unquote hard sciences that take people away from being more encouraged towards philosophy, political science, where you might engage critical thinking and ideas that would challenge the world as is. So if the HBCU, we've talked more than I would have even thought about this particular subject. The HBCU has intentionally been targeted as a case study, literally, for the study potentially of Black radicalism, and targeted for a place where Black radicalism must be suppressed, managed, and encouraged in another direction. And it's very interesting when you hear the stories of, like, I remember Dr. Carr telling the story about at Howard University when they had their protests in the 60s, and Debbie Allen, sister of Felicia Rashad, who's now returned as a dean, called home, talking about she was joining the protests, and her parents said, "We didn't send you there to do that. You better get your butt back in class." Paraphrasing, in other words, we sent you there to be part of the Black bourgeoisie, not to be part of the Black liberation struggle. So we understand that these are sites of tension where there are inducements into different direction. But my favorite part about this particular line here about JP Morgan and Bank of America participating in Black and Latino housing and business loans is because, again, as we covered the other day in depth, but I just want to show very quickly here, this is where John Hope Bryant, colleague and partner with Roland Martin, comes into play to tell Black people with Operation Hope to follow his economic investment model, and looking at his partners, Bank of America, we can see, again, I'm not saying, I'm not attempting to, claim a one-to-one here, but it seems like that this is logical, that he's already on the board of, for instance, that neighborhood group, but he's working with as his job, Operation Hope. His point here, and we went in depth with this, the link is in the show notes. The point of this is to basically take white corporate funding to help Black people fix their credit and get a few Black people into mortgages that are being funded by JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America as an intentional part of this, at least in this most recent go round, as an intentional part of this post George Floyd response to Black rebellion. Which is why I thought, actually, you know what? I didn't even watch this. I think we should watch it together now. Because speaking of HBCUs, speaking of Roland Martin, and speaking of John Hope Bryant and the Nextdoor app and this buying power mythology. I was just sent this latest, well, what for me would be a latest. When did it actually? It's just a very recent. Tennessee State universities use Nextdoor to share resources, opportunity. Let's check this out real quick before we move on. And again, in the show notes, we've linked to where we really went into what Nextdoor is and isn't, and who's behind it, and all that kind of stuff. Wow.
The Hollywood Hills, and so we are here in
this is a whole segment,
of course, doing a variety of interviews, and so we've been having a great time here. I cannot wait for y'all to see the great conversations that we have been having here. All right, folks, every Tuesday, of course, we have our marketplace segment where we talk about Black businesses, and also in terms of what we are doing in terms of with technology, sponsored by Nextdoor, the app that connects communities, folks in their communities. And one of the things that they have been doing is really emphasizing what HBCU students are doing, for them to stay connected when they get to their campuses. And so we want to talk about that. This, of course, is always something that's kind of important because, when you go away to school, you definitely want to stay updated with your peeps from your hometown, and there are things that you need, things that you're looking for. I love the posts I get from people who are looking for like a farmer's market, or looking where to get their hair done, or looking for a handyman, something along those lines. And so we've got 3 students from Tennessee State.
And remember, you got to remember the other video, right?
Joining us right now is Derek Sanders, Aubrey Sales, and Cedric Waters. Glad to have all 3 of you here. So, first of all, how are things going? Are you back? I don't
want to bring them into this. Let me just see. Shout out to the students, man. I love the students, man. I love their energy. I love that they want to do this. Here's the ad. Yeah, we saw this ad last time, because this is the one where they show, wasn't this the one where they show how happy, this is my man happily gentrifying the neighborhood, or surviving the gentrifying neighborhood, being, so he can alert his new white neighbors that he's not a threat. Yeah. That's the app, and that's the CEO. Okay. All right. Well, that was interesting. But anyway, I think, from just getting back to the matter at hand, I mean, I do think that whether there's a one-to-one, or whether it's just coincidence, or whether it's just business as usual, It's interesting to note that this article points out specifically to the fact that there is a decided interest in using what little bit of money that they've made in 1 year. And by the way, that was just 1 year's earnings. 526 billion net was just 1 year's earnings. They gave 50 billion, only 4 billion of which is a donation, a straight donation. And only 2 billion of that is straight donations to people doing financial literacy and whatnot. The rest is going to encourage Black people to get mortgages, which will bring money, not only will likely bring or potentially bring a profit to them, but is ultimately of very little cost to them. So but anyway, the piece continues here. Profit-driven corporations will not propel transformational change with money alone, experts say. That will require corporate and government policy changes aimed at addressing the historic destruction of Black wealth, said Marisa Baradaran, a law professor at the University of California at Irvine, whose research focuses on financial inclusion and the racial wealth gap. The answer to these massive problems is not in capitalism doing better or more. It's not going to come from philanthropy. It's not going to come from promises. It's got to be a policy change, said Baradaran, who has informally advised companies on impact investing. We don't want just benevolent billionaires and nicer, softer, more woke monopolies. We want an economic structure that allows for more mobility, and we don't have that. So that's more akin to the Baradaran with which I'm familiar. But again, I think speaks to what is, of course, the problem here, that you're not going to get corporations who are bent on making wealth, extracting wealth. They're not going to be of much help. Now, I mean, I don't think we need an economic model that just makes room for more mobility, as she says. I would prefer to think of one that guarantees a level of wealth redistribution that makes inequality moot. But that's where our political differences are. She never promised to presented herself as anything other than that. And I think that what she says there is exactly right. That if you want the kind of change people say they want, you have to have policy. It's not going to be about philanthropy and the benevolence of rich whites. But the section, and this was, I think, specifically what Two Black was asking me to look at or wanted me to look at for my own particular work and interests. And again, I appreciate that, is the section in the article on Black banks. And again, I've linked the whole thing so you can see it's a pretty extensive piece that more or less reaches the conclusion that where we all start from. But again, the deposits, as it says here, started soon after George Floyd's death. That's an interesting term too. Tens of millions of dollars from some of America's largest companies to a small Black-owned credit union in Mississippi. First came 10 million from Netflix, followed this year by 10 million each from PayPal and Nike, along with smaller deposits from Thermo Fisher Scientific and other corporations. We pretty much went from 0 to 54 million in corporate deposits over the past year, said Bill Bynum, chief executive and founder of Hope Credit Union. The influx of corporate deposits to Black-owned banks and other financial institutions, more than 1 billion in all from the 50 companies surveyed by the Post, is supposed to enable the undercapitalized banks historically founded to serve Black people to make more home and small business loans in low wealth communities. But the cash and corporate goodwill come with complications. Some banks were unable to absorb all the money that corporations wanted to deposit. Many Black banks lack the shareholder equity required by regulators to cover potential losses and protect deposits, which customers can withdraw at any time. This is, for me, the crux for this section, the part of the argument that of why these tactics could never work, and why trying to extrapolate from other examples or models or other communities or experiences, or the experiences of an individual or small amounts here or there, is flawed. You can't just dump money into a bank and then expect that it can distribute it in ways that will enrich a community, when through regulation or just the broader economic reality, that money isn't going to have the kinds of returns that require backing and protection to cover potential losses with shareholder equity. In other words, the people that have invested in the bank, the primary and lead investors in the bank, certainly the owners of the bank, don't have enough equity. They don't have enough wealth. They don't have enough anything to guarantee the money that, were it to be deposited, were it to be lent out, were those loans to fail, that the bank wouldn't collapse. So that often prevents banks, to the extent I've been following this, from being able to expand. And which is why, as I tried to argue in a small way in my own work and looking at research on this subject, what ends up happening in the economic scholarship and literature, when they make honest comparisons about and assessments of Black-owned banks, they compare them, if at all, when it comes to white America, they compare it to small, local, white, poor, like farmer, poor white community banks. And the same issues exist. Those poor white communities, even in a white supremacist colonial situation, cannot expand because they don't have equity in the bank. They don't have the potential on return investment, given the poverty, the lack of assets, the lack of land, all of the of wealth, etc., in their community. So in the literature I was looking at, they're saying, look, Black-owned, the biggest Black banks, or all Black banks combined, more or less equate to, maybe not the smallest, but a small white bank. And certainly individually, these Black banks, like are being discussed here, cannot absorb a whole bunch of money. So it was even like the example I was using a few months ago about the individual that the Post covered, the Black puzzle maker, who all of a sudden started getting all of this. He didn't have the ability to scale up his business to satisfy all of the increasing, and were they to continue, the ever increasing amount of orders. So you can't, what you need is the ability, as Baradaran shows brilliantly in her own work, you need, for a bank to expand, it needs access to the global market. So as she says, you can segregate people, but you cannot segregate money. And a small Black bank, or a Black-owned bank like this, is segregated from the broader global economy because it doesn't have enough wealth or assets to invest in it. It doesn't have a community that it's serving that can promise the returns on investments or loans that would allow for it to make money, or encourage more capital investment from the outside. So what these banks need, as the article continues, most is equity, long-term investments that allow them to take on more deposits that they can use to make loans. Without additional equity, Bynum said, Hope Credit Union is limited. And by the way, this is a credit union. So shout out to some in our nationalist community who have even in some friendly interviews directly taking shots at my work, saying, well, if we develop a credit union, Jared's argument no longer applies because credit unions and banks are different. Well, yes, there are differences, but essentially they're not significant differences enough that the adjustments that he claims or others might claim could happen. So the same thing here. This is a credit union, is limited in its ability to lend to Black families across the Deep South who are shut out from traditional banking system. Residents in communities without access to banks and credit unions, nearly a third of Black neighborhoods nationwide, compared to just a tenth of white ones, are instead more likely to rely on predatory lenders who charge exorbitant rates for mortgages, car notes, and emergency loans, research shows. Deposits are great, but they should be matched by a 10% contribution of equity capital, Bynum said. That will enable Black banks and credit unions to absorb more deposits and put them to work. Many companies remain reluctant to invest the equity that banks need to mitigate risk. That wasn't going to work with what we were given. This was funny, and it actually was reminiscent of a call I was on with a former group of colleagues at my university with Netflix. Quote, that wasn't going to work with what we were given authority to do and what works for our business, Netflix treasurer Shannon Alwyn said. While she said Netflix has no plans to withdraw its deposits, having that option is important. For us, liquidity was definitely a factor. So in other words, as I read it, she's saying, and Netflix is saying, look, you all aren't going to be able to pay us back. And we're not going to invest for real, because you can't make any money off of you. Sign up for our Netflix account. Her colleague, Aaron Mitchell, Human Resources Director at Netflix Animation Studio, began researching the possibility of investing in Black banks last spring before Floyd's murder, when he saw the disproportionate impact of coronavirus pandemic on Black-owned businesses. He and his colleagues read The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap, and spoke with author UC Irvine law professor Marisa Baradaran about how Black banks have been systematically starved of the capital they needed to thrive. 2 days after Floyd was murdered, Mitchell emailed Netflix CEO Reed Hastings and proposed that the entertainment giant move $100 million, approximately 2% of its cash holdings, into Black banks. That sounded like a meaningful number, Mitchell said, and looking at the amount of cash we had, it was a small enough number not to cause too many alarm bells. I love that. Nobody's going to notice 100 million going out. It's just 100 million. 6 weeks later, Netflix transferred $10 million to Hope Credit Union in a rolling 3-month certificate of deposit, the company's first deposit into a Black bank. It has since expanded its efforts beyond Black banks, moving an additional $60 million into financial institutions that support Black communities. Few companies outside major banks such as JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo are making equity investments in Black banks, Bynum said. The big banks are expected by law to meet the credit needs of underserved communities, and regulators consider their record of doing so when evaluating the applications for mergers, acquisitions, and branch openings. And so Bynum is turning to a U.S. Treasury program launched this spring aimed at injecting $9 billion in capital into minority and community lenders. Now, this is again headed towards the direction I'm talking about. Don't go to Black communities talking about invest your little bit of money and your financial literacy and buying power, blah, 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 blah. Get federal with it. That's the point. That's public policy that determines where the Treasury is going to invest. Bynum says he plans to apply $108 million in U.S. Treasury funds, which would quadruple Hope's equity. That would allow Hope to expand lending in impoverished communities across the Black Belt, offering a more affordable alternative to some prime lenders. The role of government is closing opportunity gaps that market forces like corporations are not equipped to adequately serve, Bynum said. When the market fails, government should step in, and the market has historically failed and continues to fail communities of color. Now, this again is an important statement for me, and one that, if you read Marisa Baradaran's book, is consistent with a long line of Black moderates and conservatives. So this is not even the radicals' argument that Bynum is representing here. Going back to folks like Andrew Brimmer and others that Baradaran and Nathan Connolly at Johns Hopkins and others they put me onto these folks. These are not revolutionaries, but they said the same thing. Corporations can't do it. This is not an issue of financial literacy. This is not an issue of Black businesses. This is not an issue of what Black people do with their money. It's an issue of federal government arrangement. When CEOs began issuing public statements in response to Floyd's murder, Bynum had reached out to Dan Schulman, president and chief executive of PayPal, with whom he had previously traveled the country promoting a documentary about the impact of payday lending. So again, he's, I don't know. He made the one statement. Now he's back to his PayPal buddies. PayPal ultimately committed $400 million to Black and Latino focused financial institutions. I guess he's playing both ends. I guess I understand that, including deposits $10 million in Hope and $50 million in Opus, a Black owned bank in South Carolina. Anyway, that's the tenor of, and that's ultimately how it ends. What happens if in 3 years if everyone calls their money back? Meanwhile, I've made a bunch of 10-year loans to Black-owned businesses on Main Street, he said. What a bank like ours needs is patient investors. You cannot reverse a 400-year legacy of carefully constructed systemic racism with a 2 or 3 year deposit. So there it seems like he's almost coming back to the point about how Black people behave. Or it's a two-pronged at least argument. On the one hand, he's saying, listen, we need public policy. We need something more than corporate claims of being benevolent. But on the other hand, Black people can't be in a hurry. And if they come and pull out all their money while I've given out 10-year loans to Black-owned businesses, which I'm not expecting to see for obviously 10 years, there's no money and the bank collapses and it cannot perform what many hope and claim it is here to perform. So, all right, so that was that. Again, shout out to 2 Black. I appreciate him putting me onto that article the other day, and it's just another reminder that those with wealth understand what they try to teach those of us without. That it's political power, not financial literacy. It's not buying power. It's not a business. It's financial literacy. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.